You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
wild.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322.
Buckle your seatbelt. It's time for another episode of the Prepper Recon Podcast. Whether your plan is to bug out or bug in, CampingSurvival.com has all of your preparedness needs, including fish antibiotics, long-term storage food, water filters, bug-out bags, and first aid kits. Use coupon code PrepperRecon for 5% off your entire order at CampingSurvival.com. Our individual first aid kits are now on sale. They're MOLLE-compatible pouches in Coyote, ACU, OD, or Black. They're equipped with an Israeli battle dressing, quick clot, TK4 tourniquet, suture kit, and lots of extras. It's perfect for your car, bug-out bag, or home first aid kit. Go to the PrepperRecon.com homepage and click on the IFAC store tab at the top of the page. They're on sale for $89, and that includes shipping. This kit could save your life. Today's guest is Scott Moore of WACOutdoors.com. Scott, thanks for coming on the show.
You're more than welcome, Mark.
Oh, absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on. Can you give us a brief overview of what WAC Outdoors' mission is?
Absolutely. WAC Outdoors started out with a ministry that I founded about 7 years ago, which is Wild About Christ Ministries. And the purpose of my ministry is to attract unchurched men to what we are doing. And my mantra, so to speak, is that we reach men for Christ through their love of the outdoors and all things wild. And the type of men that I'm wanting to attract, I think, would shy away from the word Christ. So I determined to use the initials and call it WAC Outdoors. And through WAC Outdoors, we run a series of retreats, and we have just kind of modified and worked with ways to get men that enjoy hunting and fishing to come along with us on those trips. And through the course of that trip, it allows them to see some Christian men being very transparent about their struggles and their need for Christ in their life. So we are witnessing through living the life in front of them. It is not a Bible study. It's not something that would scare away an unchurched person. You know, the average man has a heart that beats in his chest that longs for wild places and adventure. And the average unchurched man thinks that that feeling has no place in modern Christianity. So I think the average man would choose not to sell out, so to speak, and go to church. They want to maintain their masculinity, and they're afraid of that being stripped away from them. And WAC Outdoors, we're all about hunting and fishing and survival and archery and adventure. And we do that in a way that honors God and shows these men that they have a brotherhood or a fellowship that they can come be a part of that is more in their line of thinking than they might imagine.
Now, in Scripture, we read about Jesus going to the mountain to be alone to pray, and then the Jews essentially had an annual camping trip in Sukkot where they would go out in the woods and build little shelters and sort of as a remembrance of the 40 years they spent living in the wilderness. Do you think it's important to get away from the TV, computer, cell phones, and get outside to connect with God?
I absolutely think that it is vital and critical to do so. I believe that you need to remove yourself from the distractions so that your mind and your heart are open to hear what God has to say to you. You know, when God was dealing with Jacob, when Jacob wrestled with the angel of God and had his hip dislocated, God set about a series of events to make sure that Jacob was isolated so that he could deal with him properly. And I think that removing of oneself to the wilderness is absolutely a vital part of what is required to prepare our hearts and minds to have that experience with God.
And are you going to be involved with the ongoing Summer of Survival webinar?
I am. My portion of that is going to be aired on August 12th, I believe. And my topic is going to be, does archery have a place in a preparedness or survival situation? And of course, my answer to that is yes. And my time with the SOS group will be dealing with the ins and outs of archery as a weapon and a way of sustaining, food, recreation, exercise, entertainment. And I'm going to cover that topic very thoroughly.
Now, how did you get started in archery? And tell me a little bit about your background and what makes you an archery expert?
Well, I'm more than happy to tell you about my background, but I first must qualify this by saying that I absolutely do not consider myself an expert. I consider myself a perpetual student that is continually learning about archery in all its various forms and functions. But I can bring great wisdom to this arena because of my years of experience. Wisdom is a result of mistakes made that God, through His grace, allowed us to survive. So, to me, an expert, an X is a has-been, and a spurt is a drip under pressure. But, my background, when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, my dad and his buddies would sit in the backyard and shoot their target bows at the bales of hay. And I would come out there and hang around them. And I remember my dad letting me shoot his bow when I was so short that when I held the handle of his bow, the bottom limb tip was sitting on the ground. And I remember him going and getting a milk crate. And I stood on a milk crate and shot my father's bow. And that is my first recollection of shooting a bow and arrow. And I'm going to say I was 4 or 5 years old. And from that point, when I was 9 years old, a friend of my dad's gave me a little lemonwood longbow. And that was in 1969, by the way. So if you do the math, I'm 54 years old. But in 1969, as a 9-year-old, I got a little lemonwood longbow, and I started hunting small game with it, rabbits and squirrels. My success was, limited. But I will tell you, the flight of the feathered shaft just captured my affection like a living thing. And I can tell you from that point forward, archery is not a hobby. Archery is not a sport. Archery is a lifestyle that I have lived daily for 45 years. I remember in 1972, we were squirrel hunting and a small spike buck jumped out from under the dam of a little stock pond in a pasture. He was there in the cool when the sun was up, middle of the day. We were going squirrel hunting. This was in West Virginia. And this little buck jumped up and ran out in front of us about 25 yards away at a full gallop across the pasture. And my dad asked me, he said, if you had a bow in your hand, could you have shot that deer? Well, any 11, 12-year-old is going to say yes. So we went home that year, and my father took us out, and we bought 2 recurve bows. We bought 2 Bear Grizzly recurve bows, a 50-pound bow for him and a 45-pound bow for me, and we started practicing with those bows. And in 1975, I harvested my first white-tailed deer with that 45-pound Bear Grizzly. So from 1975 until now, I have been a successful bow hunter. I have averaged at least 2, 3, 4 large game animals a year. So if you do the math, I don't know what that adds up to, but I know I've shot over 100 deer with a bow. I've shot a pretty good handful of wild hogs, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of small game. So from that aspect of real-time, boots-on-the-ground experience, I have been a successful bow hunter for quite a few years. I've also participated in formal, organized archery. I got my first taste of that probably in the late 70s. About 1978, I started shooting field archery and started shooting 3D shoots and in archery competitions. I became the vice president and held office at various archery organizations. In 1985, I won the Ohio State Championship at the indoor round. Not to get into a lot of details for this conversation, but that is indoor archery, where you shoot at 60 feet at a bullseye that's, I think, 1 1/16 in diameter. And that 300 round is 60 arrows, a perfect round, all 60 in the bullseye is a 300. I maintained a 300 as a league average for 4 years. So I had a successful run as a tournament archer. I went on in 1986 to compete in the Nationals. I competed in archery on a national level in St. Louis, Missouri in 1986, and my goal was to be in the top 20. And I came in 17th place that year. And that might not sound real impressive, but that's out of a field of 1,100 shooters. So I felt that I was holding my own in that endeavor, but got kind of burned out on that because my mentors, the people that I looked up to, the other archers that I admired in competitive archery, it just, when the competition got to a higher level, things weren't quite as nice as I had in mind. And it's not that I couldn't take the heat, so to speak. I held my own, but in my mind, I just had a lot better things to do with my time than to stay in that arena. I enjoyed bow hunting much more. So I kind of slid out of the tournament archery picture, and I started a mail order archery company where I made custom arrows. I did that around 1987. I have made hundreds of dozens of custom arrows for many people all around the country. In 1991, I opened the Savannah River Archery Company in a commercial 3D range. I operated that for about 9 years and served the public in that capacity. And once I formed Whack Outdoors, the mainstay of that is archery. I primarily demonstrate primitive tools and weapons, and I use archery as my vehicle to connect with people and kind of build that bridge and that relationship and that bond. Through that activity, I have done hundreds of public shooting demonstrations, seminars at sports shows. I have just, I started my YouTube channel, and through my YouTube channel, I have about 50 videos that deal with hunting and fishing and archery and building equipment. And the last thing that I've done, which to me is the thing that means the most to me, the wildfire conferences, which are large Christian mini events that are similar to the Promise Keepers. Wildfire is filling arenas with 10, 12, 13, 14,000 men. And it's kind of like an outdoor show. They have hunting and fishing, rock climbing, this type of thing. And men come and do seminars and clinics and all these activities. And the speakers that they bring in are like Joe Ted-Eye from Dual Survivor, all the Duck Dynasty guys, Tim Tebow. I was asked last year to come on board with Wildfire and kind of be their archery guy. And for the Wildfire events, I do a live shooting demonstration where I shoot my bow and throw tomahawks and knives and spears and do all the wild things. And I do a seminar on effective bow hunting strategies. So that's pretty much where I'm coming from. I have literally spent the last 45 years just totally immersed in archery. And what would make me an expert, to me, that has to come about by other people's opinion of you, not what you have to say about yourself. And through my public appearances and my YouTube channel, people such as the Life Changes Be Ready folks just started contacting me and asking me if I would come share what I do and the knowledge that I have. And that's where we're at today.
That's very, very cool. And I guess all those hogs and deer that you're getting pretty well insulate you from some of the inflation we've been seeing with meat lately, especially this past year.
Absolutely. And it might not necessarily be on the topic of archery, but the one thing that I learned from my ancestors up in the hills of West Virginia is to can my deer meat. None of my deer meat has seen a freezer in 10, 12 years. I can all of my deer meat just like you would can vegetables from the garden. So that meat requires no refrigeration. It's already cooked in the can. You can eat it right out of the can if you have to. Of course, it's more desirable to heat up and mix with some other food. But yes, wild game is good for you. Venison is, absolutely more healthy than beef.
That's awesome. Yeah, we do a lot of we can meat here too. Every Thanksgiving, those turkeys will be 49 cents a pound, so we'll always get 3. So that'll be 1 for Thanksgiving, and we'll get 2 others that we'll can, and then that'll be our turkey for the year, pretty much. That pretty much takes care of us for the amount of turkey that we'll eat in a year. And then anytime we can get the pork butts on sale, we'll get a couple extra of those and cook them in the slow cooker. And I'm in South Florida, so we have a nice mojo flavor down here, which is it's a bitter orange or grapefruit with garlic and onion, and then you slow cook that, and then we'll can that, and then you can eat that with rice and beans, which is sort of a traditional Caribbean dish, or put some good South Carolina barbecue sauce on there and slap it on a bun.
There you go.
Now, what kind of archery equipment do you use now? You mentioned that you were using a recurve bow when you started out. Is that still what you use?
Yes, I have hunted with long bows and primitive bows exclusively for the last 25 years.
So you don't really shoot with compound bows at all?
I tell you what, not in years, but when I was shooting competitive archery, I started shooting a compound bow in the very late 70s, and from 1980 till around 1987, I shot competitive archery with a compound bow, and I also hunted with a compound bow. But I still use recurve bows for small game, bow fishing, this type of thing. And I think it's worth mentioning the event that occurred that made me in 1987 put my compound away forever and go back to just strictly using traditional bows. I was in West Virginia hunting, and it was the rut, and I was hunting an old logging road, had a lot of deer moving up and down it, and I was rattling with rattling horns, and I had 2 really good 8-point bucks come up on the hillside behind me and started fighting each other. And one of them broke away from the other, and he walked out on the logging road right in front of me, and I pulled my compound bow back. I put my sight pin on his chest. I squeezed the release and sat there watching him, fully expecting him to fall over, and he walked away unscathed. A few minutes later, the buck that he had been fighting came walking along, I guess to follow him and see what he was up to. I got a shot opportunity at the second buck. I shot him, same results. Now, this is coming off of a tournament season where I was shooting, 1-inch spots, hitting a 1-inch spot 52 times out of 60 shots at 20 yards. And I have 2 deer in front of me, and I've just missed both of them at a distance of about 15 yards. So something's up here. So I go back to camp, and I take a shot with my bow, and lo and behold, my bow is hitting 8 to 10 inches high at 20 yards, which is, a deer's not as big as you think they are, and that was enough to shoot over their backs. And I'm thinking, my goodness, I shoot fish with my recurve bow as far away as these deer were, and nothing is ever out of adjustment. And I just, not to say anything disparaging about compound bows, just for my own personal preference, at that time I ordered a brand new MA2 gray bark Black Widow takedown recurve bow from Ken Beck, and I have never looked back. I have shot traditional archery ever since.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Katie Armor offers affordable body armor, including level 3 trauma plates made of AR-500 steel, which can endure multiple rounds from pistols and rifles up to 7.62 NATO. All their plates are available with Rhino Linings coating to reduce SPAW. Go to katiearmor.com. That's CATI armor.com today. Do recurve bows, do they have sights on them?
You can put sights on a recurve bow, but generally in today's line of reasoning, traditional bows or your recurve bows are traditional bows, and sights are not allowed. You have to understand that back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, when I was growing up, there was not traditional archery. There was just archery, because compound bows had not come into being yet. When I grew up, we all had recurve bows, most of them with sights on them that we shot field archery with. When the compound bows came along, they were displaced. As recurve bows kind of re-emerged in longbows as a traditional endeavor after some men kind of got jaded with the compound bows, most of them are shot without sights. Myself personally, I have never shot a recurve bow with sights on it.
And is there a specific term for aiming with no sights on a bow?
Yes, it is called instinctive shooting.
And how does that work?
Well, I tell you what, instinctive shooting works just like a basketball player. When you watch an NBA basketball player, he goes down the court running, and he can jump in the air and throw up a hook shot with one hand that swishes through the center of the net. Or a football player, think of a quarterback. He gets the ball, and he has a receiver running sideways across the gridiron. That man is actually getting farther away from him and running sideways to him, and when he throws that ball, he subconsciously, through hand-to-eye coordination, throws that ball to where the ball and the running receiver intercept each other. And that is basically what instinctive shooting is. Instinctive shooting is developing a style or a form of shooting that allows you to shoot consistently the same way. From that point, your eye is watching the flight path of your arrow, and your brain imprints that flight path. And on a subconscious level, if you will practice enough to allow this natural, God-given hand-to-eye coordination to develop, your mind will subconsciously adjust your hands and your arms so that because of that pre-recorded flight and trajectory of the arrow, it knows just where to hold everything so that your arrow is going to intercept the target at various ranges. And the amazing thing about it is if your target is moving, your mind can also calculate the speed of your target and the speed of the arrow so that they can intersect on a horizontal plane along with the vertical plane. So shooting a bow instinctively, I think that's the best way to describe it. It's just letting your inner self take over, just like you're throwing a football or shooting a basket. And when you've developed a form and your equipment is put together properly, your arrow is going to go where you're looking. And that is basically instinctive shooting.
And how hard is it for the average person to learn to shoot a bow well?
You know, the average person, as long as they have the strength to pull the bow back and they have an average amount of hand-to-eye coordination, it is not very hard at all to learn to shoot a bow. The biggest key to learning how to shoot a bow is making sure that you have the proper equipment, that equipment is set up properly, and that you have someone to show you how to shoot the bow that is truly qualified to do so. That overcomes a tremendous amount of hurdles right out of the gate.
And where does somebody go to get the proper training to become a successful archer?
Well, there's several options. You can just go to an archery shop. Most archery pro shops offer lessons. But the thing that you have to be mindful of, most pro shops today are dealing with compound bows and the most modern of equipment. And they are geared towards teaching people to use that equipment and that style of shooting. So if you have it in your mind that you're going to be a traditional archer, if you have watched the Hunger Games and Katniss has turned your crank, so to speak, and you want to be that archer in the woods being stealthy and harvesting game with a recurve bow or a longbow, that certified coach, so to speak, at an archery pro shop, he can teach you the basics, but you have to be careful that that person that's teaching you is teaching and well versed in the style of archery that you are truly interested in learning. The second option is just to join an archery club. You know, when you join an archery club, any archery club is a community of people, that all have a heartfelt love for archery. There's a lot of people there that would love to mentor a newcomer. And again, as long as you're mindful that you're dealing with a person that is proven to be successful as an archer and a hunter, there are more than a handful of people at every archery range that just hang out there, and they would love to just take a beginner under their wing, and show them how to shoot and help them with their equipment. The third alternative is just to actually seek out a camp or a retreat where you pay a tuition or fee, so to speak, and you go and someone just actually teaches you how to shoot archery. And of course, I am, leaning primarily towards the, traditional archery. You can get into magazines like Traditional Bow Hunter Magazine or Primitive Archer Magazine, or go online to the Trad Gang Forum, and there are places where you can go and spend a weekend and pay a determined amount of money and have someone there that is very qualified that'll teach you how to shoot a bow. I will tell you very quickly, not to be self-serving, you asked me what WAC was all about, and we run a handful of retreats. We do a father-son camp out. We do a bushcraft retreat. We do a wilderness awareness for women. And all of these, archery is a part of it, because I feel that archery and the knowledge of archery is a key component to being a very well-rounded survivalist or preparedness type individual. And the groups that come to me, depending on what they're primarily interested in, that's what I spend the most of my time teaching. But I run a camp where, to me, you get the best of both worlds, because we put up shelters, we camp kind of primitive, we cook our food in the fire, I teach trapping skills, navigation, fire, shelter, water, the whole bit. But I teach archery from the viewpoint and standpoint of a person who has truly made primitive archery equipment, harvested game with it, cooked it, and ate it. And again, I have never considered myself an expert. My way is not the only way. My way is not necessarily the best way. But my way has worked for me for years under a multitude of different circumstances in different parts of the country. So working off of that experience base, I just feel like, I have a lot to offer if someone approaches me and just, kind of wants my take on archery and what it's all about.
And then what camps and retreats and things do you have coming up over the next few months?
I'll be honest with you, and this will prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt, I'm not very self-serving, and I'm not hawking a product here. I don't even have my camp set up for this fall yet. And the reason I don't is I'm juggling a handful of churches right now that are trying to get me in to speak to their men. And when I nail down just 2 or 3 dates with a couple of these churches here in the next week or two, I'm going to put my schedule up for this fall. And if you go on my website, which is just, WAC Outdoors, WAC Outdoors, I will have a schedule up of my retreats and my camps that I'm running. And I will typically do 3 of them, maybe 4 in the fall. And I might add that just because of the very nature and mindset of the prepping community, a lot of people, have asked if I would consider coming to them, so to speak. They had a group in a certain location, and I have been asked on various occasions now to come to a group. And that is something that, the group and their desire and wishes and what they want to accomplish is so diversified. I can't put that up like a menu or a price list, but if anybody is interested in having me come to them, I'm more than willing to travel and come to a group and bring my equipment and sit down with them and give them a day or two and just pour my heart and soul out to them and just show them and teach them everything I can about archery.
And just to recap, you said that's good. The 4 camps, one of them will be a primitive skills camp, one will be a fathers and son camp, and what were the other 2?
I do a bushcraft retreat where I just teach the basic bushcraft skills, shelter, fire, water, navigation, signaling, trapping. And I'll tell you, I don't have the mindset. Everybody's into survival today, But if you study history and you think about the indigenous cultures that lived in this country, and even the long hunters in the 1700s, you have men that spent their lives in the wilderness with just a small handful of tools and weapons that they carried with them. What is in the average person's survival kit is more than what a long hunter would take with him on an extended 7-8 month hunt for deer. So I shy away from saying I teach survival. I feel like I teach bushcraft. And I feel like, walking in the footprints of our forefathers, so to speak, and learning the ways that these men made a living in the woods and stayed for extended periods of time is going to keep us in pretty good stead for any circumstance that we run into. But to answer your question, I pretty much, I run a father-son camp out, which I do like a character conference on Friday night. I let the boys overhear a group of men talking about what it means to be a man of integrity. I send the boys out on a nature walk with a guide Saturday morning, let them see some things in the woods. While they're gone, I cover base with the men on what it means to be a godly father and husband, what scripturally we are bound to do and what our duty is. After lunch, I have a time of solitude. These men go out in the woods, and I have prayer plackets up on trees, and the prayer pertains to the discussion we've had over the breakfast fire, and let them have a time of prayer. They come back, and we let all the boys and men shoot bows, throw spears, tomahawks, knives, do everything dangerous that their mothers would be worried about because it's in their DNA to be dangerous and wild. And we have to unleash that in these young men with the tempering of some guidance and some mentoring, for some older individuals. And that's what we do. And I have an island retreat that's real popular. I live in the backwaters of the Savannah River, and we paddle canoes out on an island, sleep in hammocks. We put bottles out, catch big catfish, cook them on the fire, go over some bushcraft skills. And on all these retreats, we are learning to survive physically in the wilderness, but we are also learning how to survive spiritually in the wilderness of life. And I run that parallel throughout all my camps and everything I do. And also the wilderness awareness for women. A lot of women, they might not feel comfortable coming to an event that's going to be mostly big, grubby, smelly men. So I have partnered with my wife to do a wilderness awareness for women, where I teach women that basically are unskilled. Women that don't participate in the outdoors any farther than taking their kids to the park and maybe walking a hiking trail. I have a weekend geared towards taking those women and items they can buy at the discount store and keep them in the woods overnight with a kit put together and how to seek, shelter and do some navigating. And again, I do that with my wife, and that's a real good retreat. But any and all these retreats, archery is a big part of the retreat. Anybody that comes to any of my retreats, they're going to learn how to shoot a bow.
And
they're going to go ahead.
Do they need to bring their own bow, or are you going to supply that?
Nothing. No one needs to bring anything with them except their hands in their pockets.
If they wanted to bring their own bow, is that something they could do? And if so, what would be a good entry-level bow that would be a good value? Not necessarily the cheapest bow, but the best bow for the money for somebody that's just starting out.
Correct. And we first have to make the distinction between a compound bow and a recurve bow. And, very quickly, just for a survival situation, a preparedness situation, a lot of guys are into compound bows. Compound bows have a lot of advantages. I will tell you, there's no way around it. A compound bow is more powerful. A compound bow is more accurate. A compound bow is easier to shoot. A compound bow has that let off. A compound bow has a lot going for it, but there's drawbacks that people don't consider. A compound bow is physically heavy. A compound bow is kind of cumbersome to pack. If a compound bow requires repairs in the field, you're kind of a duck out of water unless you have some tools and parts with you and you've had some previous training on how to maintain and service a compound bow. And another thing that no one really ever considers, a compound bow is designed to be shot at a specific draw length. So if you pull your bow back to full draw and those cams break over, that is where the bow functions properly. If you hand that bow to someone who has a shorter draw, a child, the wife, they can't pull that bow back far enough to break the cams over. The bow will not perform properly for them, and they basically are just, they cannot shoot that bow. And so getting back to what I recommend, I am recommending a recurve bow. In the form of traditional archery, we do have recurve bows, we have long bows, and we have primitive bows, with the primitive bow being the hardest to shoot, the long bow being a little bit more difficult to shoot, and the recurve bow being the easiest to shoot. I'm recommending a beginner shoots a recurve bow because a recurve bow has a pistol grip style of handle on it. Technically, it's called a riser. So when you grip that riser, that handle on that bow, because of the design of the riser, you are duty bound to grab that bow the same way just about every time. So your consistency comes very readily. Also, a recurve bow is cut to center like a compound bow. So your arrow, when it's on the string and you pull it back and shoot it, your arrow is going right to the center of the bow. Whereas on a long bow or a primitive bow, your arrow is cast off to the side of the bow. It's actually pointing off to an angle, and you have to accommodate for that by the way you aim, or really having a really significant understanding of arrow spine and the archer's paradox that the arrow goes through to match that arrow up properly. But I'm recommending that the beginner starts with a recurve bow, a price range of $145 to $345. There are 4 or 5 different bows on the market that are takedown recurve bows that I would not hesitate to buy, shoot, keep long term, have in my safe house, use for survival, and harvest game with. You are absolutely able to buy a bow in that $140 to $340 range that will do that for you. I'm recommending a recurve bow that takes down with no tools, so that bow can be packed into a very small package. You can throw it into a duffel bag or a little case. Your arrows that go with that bow, it's kind of hard in this situation, in this interview, to really delve into all the ins and outs of arrows, but your arrows have to be specifically mated to your bow. They've got to be the right length, the right stiffness, the right size, and you need a quiver, something to hold the bow and the arrows while you're shooting. I'm recommending a side quiver for a beginner learning archery. That's a quiver that clips to your belt, and it has your arrows right there where you can pull them out, and you can get them back in the quiver very easily. And, a lot of people want to shoot use the back quivers because the back quiver is, what you're seeing on TV and all these movies. And it's exciting and it looks great, but, the back quiver has the drawback of you got to reach back there and get your arrows. Your arrows are sticking up above your head. They'll catch in the brush. They rattle around. They make noise. So for the beginner, I'm going to go with a recurve bow, a side quiver. You need a shooting glove or tab and an arm guard. And you need properly spined arrows, the proper size for your bow. And you're just going to have help making these decisions if you're just a straight up beginner. But the most important decision you have to make, and it's a hurdle that beginners have to overcome, is how strong of a bow are you going to buy? Because, the average person equates the poundage of the bow with power, and more power is better. But that is not often the case. We want to start with a bow that you can physically pull back and learn the process of shooting without fighting physically a bow that's so strong you can barely pull it back. So there's nothing wrong with a lady starting with a 15 to 25 pound bow. There's nothing wrong with a man starting with a 35 pound bow, a 40 pound bow. The average man, and I have dealt with hundreds of them, a big burly guy, even a guy that's weightlifted, strong, sturdy. You use muscles to shoot a bow that you don't use to do anything else. And a 40-pound bow is usually just about all that you want to handle until you've really done some shooting and have your muscles developed. And I will tell you that a 40 to 45-pound bow will effectively harvest deer, any small game you want, and a lot of target practice. And there's an advantage to a bow that is not quite as powerful that people don't often consider. If you shoot a very powerful bow, you tear up your targets in your backstop quickly and you're shooting through them. A very powerful bow, if you miss the backstop and you hit a rock or a tree or a stump or whatever, you're a lot more likely to damage your arrows. Whereas if you're shooting a 40-pound bow, 35-pound, 45-pound bow, a lot of times your arrows will withstand the abuse of hitting a lot of different objects and still remain in one piece and useful.
Very cool. You've given us a lot of great information today, Scott. And, of course, we're going to have links in today's show notes to your website and also to your YouTube channel. But for one last time, can you tell everybody what the website web address is and also how they can find you on YouTube?
Sure. Again, just think Whack Outdoors. And Whack is spelled W-A-C. So if you type in Whack Outdoors on Google or any search engine, you are going to see my website. My YouTube channel is actually called Wild About Christ. But if you just type in Whack Outdoors, lowercase letters, I promise you, all you'll see going down the thing will be probably my videos. I have a Facebook page, which is Whack Outdoors LLC. And on Facebook is really the easiest place to keep up with me and what I'm doing because that is so interactive and I can get on there and update that daily. But I have really enjoyed this discussion, Mark, and I would just love for people to come and visit the website and see what we're doing.
Well, Scott, thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show today. It's been a pleasure.
You are more than welcome. It's been my privilege and honor.
American Reset, the long-awaited conclusion of the Economic Collapse Chronicles, is now available. In Book 3, the ultimate contest between liberty and tyranny reaches the apex. The Bear family and their neighbors fight to survive the fallout of the meltdown and cling to the principles in the Constitution. Will the collapse bring an oppressive regime that enslaves the American people, or will the patriots prevail and guide the country back to freedom, peace, and prosperity? Get your copy in Kindle, audio, or paperback on Amazon today.